As the Duke of Kent lay surrounded by silence and shadow, a single whispered sentence turned the future of the monarchy upside down. What he revealed wasn't a request, it was a final royal directive, dripping with betrayal, favoritism, and a buried grudge. Catherine must inherit my crown jewels, not Camilla's bloodline. A dying man's truth has now ignited a secret war inside the palace. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was just past midnight when two senior aides, both personally vetted by the Duke himself, were summoned to his private quarters under strict instruction. No press, no protocol. What happened behind that closed door would remain classified for only a few hours before the whispers spilled into the corridors of power. With frailty in his voice but clarity in his intent, the Duke made a statement that defied not just royal etiquette, but the sacred hierarchy itself. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stutter. He named Catherine. Not as a choice of preference, but as a necessary act of protection. The implications were immediate and devastating. The two witnesses were given strict instructions to document his words and act accordingly. But before anyone beyond those walls could begin to interpret the gravity of what had been spoken, a sealed letter hand-signed by the Duke only days prior surfaced in the vault of his legal representative. The letter didn't elaborate, it confirmed. It reiterated what his final breath had made clear. Camilla's bloodline was to be excluded from inheriting the jewels that had survived world wars, revolutions, and betrayals of every scale. And Catherine's name, marked 3 times in the Duke's own hand, was the only one underlined, as if there was no room for debate. By sunrise, the Duke's vault at Kensington was placed under emergency lockdown. No one in, no one out. The coded key that had once been safeguarded by royal tradition was now locked within a legal storm. Palace insiders say Charles was not immediately informed of the confession, perhaps intentionally. The royal communications team was thrown into chaos as internal silence battled mounting speculation. The timing couldn't have been more devastating. The monarchy was already walking a tightrope of public scrutiny, and now, one of its oldest and most respected voices had added kindling to the fire by choosing Catherine, not just as kin, but as keeper of legacy. And behind this earth-shattering confession loomed an even darker question. Why now? Why her? Why such a direct attack on Camilla's lineage? The Duke's actions may have broken protocol, but they were no accident. They were calculated, born of something deeper, older, and far more personal. His dying words weren't the beginning of the story, they were the climax of a cold, hidden war fought behind palace walls for decades. But what could have driven a senior royal to break the code of loyalty and target Camilla's bloodline so specifically? The answer lies buried in a decades-long rivalry. Long before Catherine entered the royal frame, the Duke of Kent watched a silent war unfold from the shadows, a battle not of swords, but of succession. Behind smiles and duty, the seeds of resentment between Camilla's family and traditional royals had grown roots. His confession wasn't spontaneous, it was years in the making. What seemed on the surface like a dying man's final wish was in fact the culmination of a long-suppressed feud, a quiet but deliberate strategy crafted by a man who had spent a lifetime safeguarding the sanctity of the crown. The Duke had held his silence while others played politics, but in his final breath, he chose sides with piercing clarity. The tension began to thicken when Charles, against the quiet resistance of many old guard royals, began elevating Camilla's standing within the family. The Duke, known for his stoic allegiance to Queen Elizabeth's original vision, saw this as a betrayal not just of legacy, but of lineage. It wasn't just Camilla he distrusted. It was the broader implications of her bloodline's growing proximity to the throne. He had once confided in a palace aide that Camilla's circle didn't understand the monarchy, they merely wanted to bask in its glow. The phrase he used behind closed doors was damning. Social climbers, cloaked in borrowed dignity. The Duke's relationship with Charles cooled noticeably during this time, not through public confrontation, but through withdrawal. The warm, familial rapport they once shared grew distant as the Duke began corresponding more frequently with the late Queen. In these letters now, the subject of internal scrutiny, he reportedly outlined his fears about Camilla's growing influence and his belief that the monarchy was on the verge of being redecorated by those who never built it. His writings were steeped in sorrow, not spite, but the meaning was unmistakable. He feared the crown would be reshaped by those who had not earned their place in its history. Through it all, Catherine remained untouched by scandal or self-promotion, and the Duke noticed. He watched how she carried herself not just in public, but within the private walls of Windsor and Sandringham. He saw the way the Queen looked at her, with rare approval. He saw the reverence Catherine commanded, not through command, but through conduct. In many ways, she represented the very values the Duke had dedicated his life to preserve. In her, he saw a living echo of Queen Elizabeth, someone not seeking power, but someone deserving of it. Even among palace staff, the divide was obvious. There were hushed whispers about how the Duke would make a point of speaking to Catherine at family events, while bypassing Camilla's relatives altogether. At one gathering, he reportedly excused himself early when seated beside Camilla's nephew. That act alone sent ripples through the hierarchy. The Duke's disdain had become open enough to notice, but never loud enough to confront. That was his method. Reserved, calculated, but resolute. Privately, he is believed to have said, "The monarchy is only as strong as the blood that binds it." That phrase has since echoed among insiders, a chilling clue that the Duke had long decided Camilla's bloodline was unworthy of inheritance. To him, this wasn't a personal feud, it was a matter of national identity, a duty to guard not just jewels, but the soul of the institution itself. And while the bitterness simmered behind closed doors, it was one royal woman, poised and unsuspecting, who had unknowingly become the Duke's silent champion. She never asked for this. Catherine never campaigned, never whispered in corridors, never played court politics. And yet, somehow, she became the Duke's unwavering choice. Why her? What had she done to be named the guardian of treasures meant for kings? In the rigid world of royal tradition, where every gesture is weighed and every silence is interpreted, Catherine's ascension wasn't loud, it was inevitable. It began, quietly, during a moment of royal turmoil that few ever speak of. A private crisis had gripped the family, and while others retreated, Catherine remained composed, present, and deeply loyal. Her strength wasn't loud, but the Duke noticed. That was the moment she stepped into his vision, not as a duchess by marriage, but as a custodian of legacy. The Duke, ever the observer, had grown weary of hollow displays of duty. What he sought was something rarer, a woman who could hold the weight of centuries without faltering. Catherine's reaction during the Meghan and Harry exodus stunned him. Where others scrambled to save face, she exuded grace. She didn't retaliate. She didn't leak. She simply endured. That quiet fortitude echoed the monarchs of old. Traditionalists, still reeling from the fracture within the firm, began to look at her differently. She wasn't just a symbol of the present. She had become the hope of continuity. The Duke, watching all of this unfold, grew convinced she was the only one worthy of the crown's oldest secrets. Over the years, Catherine's position grew, not because of favours or family, but because of her unwavering conduct. Behind closed doors, senior royals began consulting her, not out of obligation, but out of genuine trust. She brought calm to rooms rife with tension. She carried herself not with entitlement, but with earned dignity. One visit to the Duke's private residence, years before his final illness, remains the subject of intense speculation. No official record exists of what was said, but insiders claim that when she left, the Duke was never the same. He began reorganizing his private documents. He made notes. He drafted letters. That single, unannounced meeting may have been the moment he decided who would carry forward the crown's buried weight. Among the most astonishing details of his decision was the nature of the jewels themselves. These weren't ordinary adornments. They included heirlooms unseen since the days of Queen Mary, items never worn by Camilla, nor even considered for display under her branch of the family. Some believed the Duke had personally hidden several pieces, safeguarding them for a future only he could envision. And now, that future had a name. Catherine wasn't merely a preferred successor she had become, in his mind, a living embodiment of royal integrity. In Catherine, the Duke saw the impossible balance the monarchy so desperately needed. She was modern, yet respectful of the past. Approachable, yet never ordinary. She represented not just the next generation, but a restoration of dignity the Duke feared was slipping away. That's why he chose her. Not for her title, nor her public persona, but for something far deeper. She carried the burden without complaint, the history without ego, and the future without fear. And that, in the Duke's final judgment, made her more royal than anyone Camilla's lineage could ever offer. But even as Catherine unknowingly ascended in the Duke's eyes, Camilla's family was preparing their own quiet coup, with ambitions that would soon clash violently with legacy. While the world saw smiles, the corridors of power whispered a different truth. Camilla's family wasn't just content with influence, they wanted legacy. And what the Duke viewed as infiltration, Camilla's bloodline saw as overdue elevation. The lines had been drawn long before anyone realized it. The silent war, once hidden behind pearls and protocol, had evolved into something far more strategic. Within the palace, whispers grew louder. Camilla's children and grandchildren were slowly, methodically positioning themselves within the institution. Not through public declarations, but through small, almost imperceptible moves that signaled something larger, brewing beneath the surface. It began with ceremonial roles. An internal memo, never meant for public eyes, was leaked just months before the Duke's passing. It outlined interest from Camilla's eldest son in attending and possibly participating in a series of high-profile royal engagements. The phrasing was innocuous requests for inclusion, ceremonial advisement, representational visibility. But for those who understood the language of monarchy, the implications were thunderous. This wasn't just ambition, it was encroachment. The Duke, already wary of Camilla's increasing reach, was said to have reacted with fury. His private remark to an aide left little to the imagination. "They'll pawn the crown if we let them near it." To the Duke, this wasn't about blood. It was about what blood stood for. He saw Catherine as a vessel of tradition, a continuation of the sacred duty passed down from Queen Elizabeth herself. But Camilla's family outsiders to the Windsor line represented, in his eyes, the commercialization of monarchy, the dilution of something ancient. Even Queen Elizabeth, known for her diplomacy, had reportedly maintained a polite but frosty distance from Camilla's extended relatives. Her choices were subtle but deliberate absences from private invitations, omissions from inner-circle briefings, and a notable silence when it came to titles or public endorsements. It was not hostility, it was exclusion masked as neutrality. But Camilla was not blind to any of it. Her resentment boiled beneath the surface, especially as she watched Catherine receive key state invitations without her. Events where Camilla, the Queen Consort, was traditionally expected to be present, yet found herself curiously uninformed or formally bypassed. One event, in particular, reportedly pushed her over the edge, a foreign dignitaries' gala where Catherine stood alone beside the king. That image, broadcast worldwide, sent a message louder than any press release, and Camilla heard it clearly. Even staffing choices began to reflect the shifting power dynamic. Senior aides aligned with Catherine quietly began replacing long-standing members of Camilla's personal circle. Roles were reshuffled. Titles adjusted. What appeared to be organizational restructuring was, in truth, a redrawing of influence. Camilla's reach was narrowing, Catherine's was expanding, and all the while, the Duke watched recording, writing, preparing. He didn't shout, he didn't warn, he simply acted, because to him, the stakes were no longer political. They were existential, and with the Duke's final breath approaching, He knew the hour of revelation had come. The palace had become a chessboard. Catherine had become the queen in waiting, not by crown, but by consequence. And Camilla's family? They were making moves for a future that no longer welcomed them. The game was accelerating, but the Duke held the next play. And then came the moment that shifted everything, the unlocking of the Duke's sealed vault and the explosive contents hidden within. The vault was never meant to be opened while Camilla lived. Its key was ceremonial, its contents legendary. But once the Duke's confession surfaced, the lock was broken. Inside, glistening beneath velvet, lay more than treasure. It was a map of power, a rebuke, and a royal reckoning. No one outside a tiny circle of advisors even knew the vault still existed, let alone what lay behind its thick, steel-reinforced doors. But when the Duke's deathbed wishes became impossible to contain, the palace had no choice. What was once guarded in silence now exploded into scandal. The jewels retrieved weren't just valuable, they were symbolic. Each one bore history, intent, and inheritance. Among them were pieces last seen on Queen Alexandra and Queen Mary artifacts, untouched for generations, bypassed in ceremonial rotations, and omitted from royal exhibitions without explanation. These weren't decorative. They were declarations. Hidden between the compartments, in a sealed, monogrammed folder, was a document with a title few had ever heard before: Preservation of Legacy. And at the bottom, the unmistakable signature of the Duke of Kent. It outlined his justification for withholding the heirlooms, not as an act of secrecy, but as an act of safeguarding. He feared misuse, misplacement, and misrepresentation. He feared what these jewels would symbolize in the wrong hands. Tucked beneath a satin-wrapped tiara was a chilling note in the Duke's handwriting. 6 words, scrawled with finality. To be worn only by a queen with Windsor blood. That phrase shattered the quiet understanding that Camilla, though queen consort by marriage, would ever be entrusted with what the Duke considered sacred lineage. He had made his stance clear. The jewels were not meant for show, they were meant for succession, and the bloodline mattered. And just inches from that tiara, engraved carefully into a golden tag, was a name that required no crown to carry weight: Catherine. Her name appeared more than once, not scribbled hastily, but etched with precision. Tags beside bracelets, brooches, and pendants each bore her name as if she had already been chosen. Not a hint of ambiguity remained. The Duke hadn't merely favoured her, he had documented her ascension with the care of a man entrusting a kingdom's relics to its last worthy heir. And the moment those items were retrieved, under maximum security, something else happened that sent an unmistakable signal to the rest of the royal machine. Camilla was not informed. She found out hours later, and when she did, she erupted. Sources inside the palace say her fury was immediate and thunderous. Demands were made. Questions were shouted. Who approved the opening? Who authorized the removal? But it was too late. The jewels had already been logged, recorded, and discreetly escorted away from the vault. Guards, aides, and royal advisors had followed a sealed protocol set in motion by the Duke himself. There was no reversing it. And for Camilla, it wasn't just a loss of jewels, it was a public unveiling of rejection, a final blow from a man she could never win over, even in death. But it wasn't just the jewels that caused the stir, it was what the Duke had written, in his final hours, that would ignite the fiercest backlash yet. The letter was handwritten. No lawyers, no fanfare, just truth from a dying royal's hand. It didn't leave room for interpretation. It named Catherine as the spiritual heir and called Camilla's rise a misstep in royal destiny. The palace tried to suppress it, but the ink had already stained the future. Delivered in a sealed envelope, lined with the Duke's personal crest, the document arrived at the palace just hours after his passing. It was short, fewer than 300 words, but every line carried the weight of a dynasty. The message was not gentle, it was not ceremonial, it was raw, unfiltered, and unrelenting in its judgment. And once read aloud to a select group of senior royals, it became clear that the Duke had chosen honesty over harmony. At the heart of the letter was a single, devastating declaration: the preservation of royal integrity now rests with Catherine. The Duke had made his choice unmistakably clear. He didn't refer to her title. He didn't mention her marriage. He referred to her as the pillar upon which the future of the monarchy must now stand. Beneath that, in bold, sharp strokes, he added a line that shook every listener in the room. Camilla was never meant to wear the crown. The words weren't just controversial, they were treasonous to some and truth to others. For decades, the family had built a fragile balance around Camilla's position. With one letter, the Duke demolished that scaffolding. And then came the instructions, the ones no one had expected. Not just an opinion, but an order. The Duke explicitly requested that the jewels locked away in his vault be transferred directly to Catherine's personal care. Not to the crown, not to the state, but to her, by name. As keeper of legacy, as protector of grace. The jewels, he wrote, were more than ornaments. They were symbols of restraint, sacrifice, and duty, none of which can be entrusted to those who sought the throne by proximity, not principle. Those lines, now etched in royal memory, detonated like a charge beneath the palace foundations. The legal implications were immediate and chaotic. Could a dying duke's private letter override sovereign authority? Could a personal bequest carry enough weight to dismantle decades of carefully constructed public image? Royal legal advisors scrambled, divided between those who believed the Duke's wishes should be honoured in full, and those who feared the political cost of setting such a precedent. At the centre of it all stood Charles, reportedly shattered by the letter's contents. He had lost not just an uncle, but a quiet ally. And in his final act, that ally had delivered a ruthless critique of the very path Charles had chosen by elevating Camilla to queenly heights. Inside the palace, loyalties fractured. Princess Anne, known for her unshakable sense of duty, was said to have folded the letter and kept a copy in her private study. Edward reportedly read it twice and said nothing for the rest of the evening. Camilla, on the other hand, demanded a private review of the document's authenticity, an attempt to frame it as the confused ramblings of an old man, rather than the sharp precision of a lifelong strategist. But no one could unwrite the words. The ink was real. The betrayal was absolute. As the palace reeled from the letter's brutal clarity, one woman's silence became the loudest voice in the kingdom. Catherine said nothing, and in that silence, the monarchy trembled. No statements, no rebuttals, just a quiet presence that confirmed everything and denied nothing. It was a royal move, not of denial, but of destiny. As headlines exploded, court watchers speculated, and palace corridors hummed with disbelief, Catherine withdrew from the noise. Not out of fear, but out of discipline, while others scrambled for footing in the avalanche unleashed by the Duke's final words. She stepped out of view and into legend. Early the next morning, long before the palace gates stirred, she was seen entering a private chapel alone. No entourage, no press, just stillness, prayer, and a silence that screamed louder than any press conference ever could. The world demanded a reaction, but Catherine, always measured, chose absence. Her communications team offered nothing to reporters who camped for days. Every question was met with an airtight, no comment. But the refusal to speak only deepened the intrigue. Was it humility, or was it power? Behind closed doors, the weight of the Duke's letter, the legacy of the jewels, and the thunderous fallout of his confession had fallen squarely at her feet. And while others panicked, Catherine moved with quiet deliberation. She didn't lean on statements. She leaned on something far more enduring: dignity. In a move that sparked even more speculation, Duchess Sophie, one of the few royals known to share a deep bond with Catherine, paid her a private visit. What happened during that visit remains a mystery, but what followed made headlines across Europe. Sophie left the residence visibly shaken, her eyes red, her composure fractured. Some claimed she had learned the true extent of what Catherine was now being asked to carry. Others whispered that the letter had included an undisclosed clause, one that placed a heavier, almost sacred burden on Catherine's future role. Whatever the truth, the tears weren't staged. They were the result of something irreversible. Within palace walls, staff began noticing subtle movements. Catherine had begun reaching out to jewel historians, requesting information on pieces that hadn't seen daylight in nearly a century. These weren't decorative curiosities. They were symbolic weapons in a war of legacy. Every inquiry, every discreet meeting, hinted that Catherine was not avoiding responsibility, she was preparing for it. And the public? They responded in kind. Hashtags supporting Catherine dominated social media for days. Editorials praised her composure. Memes reframed her silence as strength. A once divided public, fatigued by scandal and spectacle, found themselves rallying behind a woman who said nothing but somehow said everything. Camilla, however, didn't view the silence as strength. She saw it as strategy, and she was furious. Sources inside Clarence's house claim she demanded an emergency meeting with Charles, insisting that anything be done to stop what she called a manipulated public coronation. Her fear wasn't just about jewels. It was about relevance, influence, control, and for the first time in years, she could feel it slipping. The power she had fought for, endured for, and finally worn was evaporating in real time. And all because one woman refused to speak. But it wouldn't stay silent for long, not with Camilla preparing one last desperate move to reclaim her legacy. Cornered and humiliated, Camilla struck back. A strategic retaliation meant to isolate Catherine, reclaim control, and rewrite the Duke's narrative. But what began as a counterattack spiraled into a full-blown palace standoff, one that would expose the monarchy's deepest fractures. In the hours following the public's emotional rally behind Catherine, Camilla's actions shifted from subtle to surgical. The first wave came quietly. Key staff members closely aligned with Catherine were reassigned, dismissed, or abruptly relocated. Their removals were wrapped in the language of restructuring, but no one inside the palace mistook it for anything less than a purge. This wasn't reorganization. This was retaliation, masked as protocol. Then came the leak. Within days, anonymous sources began feeding stories to select members of the press, stories aimed at dismantling the sanctity of the Duke's final days. Claims that he had been confused, forgetful, easily manipulated. That perhaps the letter, the vault, the declarations weren't the words of a man of sound mind, but of one swayed by sentiment, or worse, misled. The aim was clear: discredit the source, disarm the impact, and dismantle Catherine's silent rise. But the smear campaign didn't land as Camilla hoped. The public saw desperation, the palace saw cracks, and Charles saw something else entirely: chaos. He was caught in the eye of a storm. On one side, a wife demanding that her family not be erased. On the other, the memory of a beloved uncle whose final words were now treated as sacrilege. Charles was reportedly torn, plagued by sleepless nights and closed-door meetings. Every move he made risked alienating one half of the monarchy to protect the other. And yet, in that turbulence, one figure refused to waver: Princess Anne. Known for her loyalty not to individuals, but to the institution itself, Anne quietly aligned with Catherine. Not with pomp, not with politics, but with principle. Insiders claim she told one aide, "The Duke made his choice, and I will honor it." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a secret council was formed. Legal advisors, senior courtiers, and 2 former Crown historians met in secrecy to evaluate the legitimacy of the Duke's will and the vault's contents. What power did a private royal directive hold? Could jewels be assigned outside the official line of succession? These weren't just legal questions, they were existential ones. And while the answers remained pending, the public watched with bated breath as the royal website published a new family portrait. One detail didn't go unnoticed: Camilla's descendants were nowhere to be seen. It was a seismic message, sent not through words, but omission. The monarchy was drawing lines and erasing names. The image, though carefully posed, exposed the divide. It was a new arrangement of old power, and for Camilla, the absence was louder than any confrontation. Her countermove had failed to shift the narrative. Instead, it ignited something far more dangerous, a full reckoning of legacy, loyalty, and lineage. And yet, even as the palace braced for collapse, a final revelation would come to light, one the Duke had hidden deeper than any jewel. At the very bottom of the vault, behind velvet and steel, a smaller box was found. Inside, not just jewels, but a crown. A forgotten coronet from the House of Tech, kept in secrecy, meant only for a woman who carried legacy, sacrifice, and grace. The Duke had chosen Catherine not just for inheritance, but for coronation. The room fell silent as the box was opened. What lay inside wasn't glitter or gold, it was a statement that reached beyond the grave. The Tech diadem, believed to have been lost during the reshuffling of royal estates in the early 20th century, shimmered with untouched defiance. It hadn't been seen in over 70 years. And yet, here it was, in pristine condition, protected by layers of cloth and memory, waiting for a woman who had never asked for a throne, but had been quietly chosen for one. The note that accompanied it was brief, hand-penned by the Duke himself, dated 5 years prior to his death, for she who rises without asking. Those 6 words were more than poetic, they were prophetic. It was a coronation in sentiment, if not in law. The diadem, historians quickly revealed, had been modified decades ago by Queen Elizabeth II herself. Slight alterations to the band, an added gemstone at the center, details never disclosed to the public, never catalogued in official records. Why? Because it had been set aside, perhaps even ordained, for a future moment that the Queen and the Duke believed might never come but still hoped would. A royal historian, brought in under strict confidentiality, offered a chilling interpretation. The crown wasn't just ceremonial, it was symbolic. It represented a quiet internal lineage, one not rooted in title but in temperament, a transfer of feminine power from one era to the next, from Queen Elizabeth to Catherine, from duty to grace. The historian's report, initially withheld, eventually circulated among senior staff, and when Catherine was shown the coronet for the first time, those present later recounted that she said nothing, simply lowered her head and held the box for several minutes. By the time she left the room, 2 senior aides were in tears, not because of what had happened, but because of what it meant. Camilla, by then, had made her final legal bid to reclaim the vault. Her counsel argued the diadem had been state property, and therefore part of crown holdings, not personal inheritance. But the case didn't survive. The Duke's written instructions, paired with supporting documentation from Queen Elizabeth's archive, ended the challenge before it could reach formal arbitration. The box, the jewels, and the coronet remained with Catherine. And Camilla? She vanished from the spotlight in what aides called a period of private retreat. And now, as the crown settles not just on heads but hearts, the question echoes across the kingdom. Has the true queen already been chosen, not by title, but by legacy? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.